We're going to bring in Seth Kaplan, who is managing director of Airline Weekly, writes extensively about these issues. Phil, what do you make of all this, and particularly Gordon Bethune, who's been so involved in the airline industry for a long time now, and actually the placement of various CEOs?
Yeah, there are some interesting personalities involved here. You know, when you look at that slate that, as Phil said just yesterday, United's board added the three new directors, Jim Whitehurst among them. He was an executive at Delta back, almost a decade ago. And there was a period of time where right before Delta's current and soon to retire CEO left was hired rather to be CEO, Gordon Bethune was actually advising Delta's board and advised them against making Jim Whitehurst CEO. He told me that in an interview a few years ago. And so there's, some interesting dynamics there going back a long way. And so, yeah, Bethune, who, by the way, his protege, you might remember last fall, Jeff Smizek, who was replaced by Oscar Munoz. All kinds of dynamics here. Almost, as Phil mentioned, with these new directors, almost reminds you of when Franklin Delano Roosevelt back in the 1930s didn't like what was happening at the Supreme Court. He tried to add new justices to make it more friendly.
Yes, the 1930s is a good reference because it was probably the last year that there was an on-time flight in or out of Newark Airport. Also, by the way, and most of that is United. You can see there's a little personal rage coming through here, Seth. But what can they do? Actually, I'll defend United a bit. What actually can the board fix?
Well, that's the big question, Brian. We ran a cover story last fall, actually, when they appointed Munoz. We called it the jockey or the horse, ? Basically, the question being, and that's a reference, by the way, that Bethune has used over the years, if a horse isn't running correctly, do you have a slow horse, or do you have, as Bethune has said, a fat jockey on the horse who's slowing it down? Because United has been, and I mean, it's true what these hedge funds are saying, an underperformer, but that goes back, 35 years. American and Delta both at various times have led the industry for a sustained period financially. United never really has among the airlines that survived deregulation. So, is it this board's fault, this management team's fault, or is there just something structural about United that makes it harder to run?
You posed the question. What's the answer?
Well, it's an interesting question. If you compare it to Delta, for example, United's a much more unionized airline.
Right.
But, American's a heavily unionized airline, too. There are things like that. One thing I'll tell you, you mentioned Newark. Newark's a good hub. United has a good presence in a lot of big markets. What it doesn't have is hub cities that it dominates in the way Delta dominates Atlanta, in the way American dominates Charlotte and Philadelphia. And those are the places where, as an airline, you tend to run up the score and then just kind of hope to hold serve in the more competitive places like Chicago, where United's head-to-head against American.
One quick thing to keep in mind. This board battle, it's intriguing, in part because Munoz was on the Continental board with Bethune. I mean, there's a lot of relationships.
It feels like there's a lot of old scores here, a lot of old animosity.
Our audience, to a large extent, if you're not an investor, you're looking at this saying, can United get its act together? And that's what Oscar Munoz is hoping to do. He's much better with labor relations than Jeff Smizek. They've ratified a few contracts. They did the pilots not too long ago. Yes, the Teamsters were protesting today. Oscar Munoz, will he have a chance to implement his plan? Or does this distract him from that? Because at the end of the day, that's really what people who fly United are most interested in.
All right.
Yeah, this is, just quickly, this is the only industry, unless you guys can think of another one, where you can be lousy and do fine, because 40 airports have a monopoly on out of the top 100. If you live in New Jersey, you are pretty much stuck with United.
But Brian, we're in
and if you live in Miami, you're pretty much stuck with American.
Right now, we're in the salad days for this industry. It's not going to last for long.
I'm not talking about the profitability. You're right. I'm talking about the operations.
Right. But when the profitability goes away, that's when you find out who's got the management team that works.
Got it, Phil. Thank you. Phil, Seth, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.